The roar of the crowd shakes the stone arena as two gladiators clash. One swings his heavy sword, muscles straining against the weight of his armor. We picture these men as the ultimate carnivores, fueled by meat and raw aggression. But history holds a shocking secret. Many of the Roman Empire's most fearsome fighters were actually vegetarians. This single fact unravels everything we think we know about strength, survival, and the ancient world. By the end, you will understand the real, calculated reasons behind this plant-based diet. A truth more fascinating than any Hollywood myth. How did a diet of barley and beans create a champion built to survive the sand? And why would a gladiator's owner, a ruthless businessman, insist on this menu? What does our modern obsession with protein get wrong about ancient power? The truth is carved into their very bones. At a gladiator cemetery unearthed in the ancient city of Ephesus, modern science performed a silent interrogation. Analysis of the fighters' remains revealed a startling chemical signature, one vastly different from the general population, and even from Roman soldiers of the time. Their bones held significantly higher levels of strontium and lower levels of zinc. This specific mineral profile is the unmistakable fingerprint of a diet overwhelmingly based on plants, particularly barley and beans. These men were not just occasionally eating vegetables. They were sustained by them. The ancient writers knew it too, often referring to gladiators with a dismissive nickname, the barley men. It was a label that spoke of their cheap, grain-heavy sustenance, a far cry from the heroic feasts of meat we envision. So the question sharpens. This was not a personal choice or a fad. It was a systematic, universal practice across the gladiatorial schools. Why would the entire brutal economy of the arena deliberately fuel its most valuable assets, its star performers, with what seems like peasant food? The answer lies not in what was missing from their diet, but in what this specific menu was engineered to provide. The evidence from Ephesus is not just a story told by historians. It is written in calcium and strontium. In 2014, a team of scientists published a study that changed our understanding of these fighters forever. They examined the skeletal remains of more than 70 individuals from a gladiator cemetery, using a technique called isotopic analysis. Think of it as a lifelong dietary journal, recorded by the body itself. What they found was definitive. The gladiator bones contained staggeringly high levels of strontium, a mineral abundant in plants, and equally high levels of calcium. This specific chemical signature was their smoking gun. It pointed directly to a diet dominated by barley, beans, and lentils. But the high calcium was the real clue, the detail that explained the how. The researchers concluded these men were not just eating plants. They were drinking a tonic made from plant ashes. Ancient texts describe gladiators consuming a drink made from charred wood or bone ash, a substance called pulvis. This ash, mixed with water or vinegar, was their ancient sports supplement. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to fortify the body, to load the bones with extra calcium for strength, and more importantly, for faster recovery from the brutal fractures and wounds suffered in the arena. Their daily meal was likely a thick, hearty porridge known as pulse, a gladiator gruel of barley, beans, and dried fruits, washed down with this ashy tonic. This was not a diet of poverty, but one of precision. Every bowl of that simple gruel was a strategic investment, designed to build a specific kind of fighter, one whose body could endure and heal with remarkable efficiency. The goal was not to create a sculpted warrior for a painting, but a resilient, durable asset who could survive to fight another day. So if meat was not the source of their formidable power, what exactly was this plant-based fuel doing for them? Their daily sustenance was a world away from sizzling steaks or roasted game. It was a thick, unglamorous porridge called pulse. This was the true fuel of the arena, a hearty mixture of boiled barley, lentils, beans, and sometimes dried figs or cheese for a bit of flavor. You have to picture a massive, steaming cauldron of this dense, beige gruel, ladled out to dozens of hungry fighters after a long day of training. It was cheap, it was filling, and it was packed with exactly what their bodies needed most: slow-burning carbohydrates and protein. Barley and beans provided a sustained energy release, the kind that could power hours of brutal drills without causing a sudden crash. This was the engine room of their diet, the consistent foundation that built endurance from the inside out. But the most fascinating ingredient was not in the pot, it was in their cup. As we learned from the bone analysis, gladiators drank a tonic made from plant ashes or charred bone, known as pulvis. Mixed with water or vinegar, this gritty supplement was their ancient version of a recovery shake. It delivered a massive, direct dose of calcium and other minerals, specifically intended to strengthen bones and accelerate healing. Think of it as preventative medicine, a daily dose of resilience poured into a man whose profession involved being hit with heavy weapons. So their plate held a calculated duality: the bland pulse for long-term fuel, and the ashy tonic for immediate structural repair. But on the day of a fight, the menu changed. Ancient sources note that gladiators might receive a special pre-game meal, a sort of ancient energy bar. This could be a mash of barley and honey, or a drink of honeyed wine. These were simple sugars, a quick burst of energy to sharpen reflexes and flood the muscles with fuel for the explosive, short-duration combat of the arena. It was a tactical spike, a final boost atop their foundation of plants. The sheer volume of food was staggering. A gladiator in training required an estimated 5,000 calories a day, a mountain of energy to maintain their powerful frames and intense activity. How could plants possibly provide that easily? Barley and lentils are incredibly calorie-dense in bulk. Consuming large, regular portions of this hearty gruel met their monumental energy needs far more efficiently and affordably than expensive meat ever could. This was not a diet of lack, but one of immense, purposeful abundance. Every spoonful was a strategic decision. So we have the what and the how, but this still leaves a deeper mystery. Why choose this specific path? What do the men who owned these fighters, the shrewd businessmen behind the spectacle, understand about the human body that we are only now rediscovering? To understand the menu, you must first meet the man who signed the checks. He was the lanista, the owner and manager of a gladiatorial school. In his eyes, a gladiator was not a hero or a celebrity. He was a piece of high-value livestock, a walking, breathing investment. The economics were brutally simple. Purchasing a new slave with potential could cost a small fortune. Training him for years under specialized coaches, the doctors, required more money. Housing, security, and medical care for dozens of men in a fortified compound was a constant drain. Every single expense, from the sandals on their feet to the bandages for their wounds, came directly out of the Lannister's purse. His profit depended entirely on one thing: keeping his assets alive and fighting for as long as possible. A dead gladiator was a total loss. A wounded one was a costly liability, unable to earn while he healed. This is where the diet of barley and beans transforms from a curious fact into a stroke of financial genius. Meat was a luxury, a sporadic treat, expensive and logistically complex to supply in bulk for a large school. But barley, lentils, and beans, they were the staples of the Roman world, cheap, shelf-stable, and available by the cartload. This plant-based gruel was the most cost-effective way to deliver the massive caloric load these men needed. It was the ultimate bulk fuel, and that ashy tonic, the pulvis, was a preventative investment, a cheap insurance policy against broken bones that could sideline a valuable fighter for months. The lanista was not a nutritionist. He was a pragmatic businessman running a dangerous, high-stakes enterprise. He fed his gladiators what would make them durable, reliable, and above all, profitable. Every bowl of bland porridge was a calculated decision to protect his capital. But this financial logic only explains part of the puzzle. If the goal was simply cheap calories, why not just feed them stale bread and water? The answer lies in what this specific combination of plants did to the gladiator's body. A physical transformation that went far beyond simple survival. This reveals a deeper layer to the logic, one rooted in an ancient science of the body. The Romans operated on a medical framework called the humoral theory. They believed health was a balance of 4 vital fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Every food and drink was thought to influence this balance, possessing qualities like hot, cold, wet, or dry. Meat, especially red meat, was classified as a hot and dry food. It was believed to produce a lean, sinewy, and aggressive type of strength, a fiery temperament suited to a hunter or a soldier on campaign. But that was not the ideal profile for a gladiator. Their combat was different. It was not about marching 20 miles or chasing down prey. It was about surviving a short, brutal exchange in a confined space. They needed to be shock absorbers. The plant-based diet of barley, beans, and lentils was seen in this system as a cooling and moistening regimen. This was not about building a runner's physique. It was believed to create a very specific body type, one with a thicker, more protective layer of subcutaneous fat and dense, solid muscle mass. Think of it as building a human tank, not a sports car. That layer of fat, which they called the crassus, was not a sign of being out of shape. It was considered functional armor. In a fight where slashing wounds were common, a layer of fatty tissue could mean the difference between a deep, mortal cut and a survivable surface wound. The dense muscle and bone, fortified by their ashy tonic, could withstand heavy blows that would shatter a leaner man. So the Lannister's financial pragmatism was perfectly aligned with this ancient nutritional science. He was not just feeding his fighters cheap calories. He was deliberately cultivating a specific kind of physicality through his kitchen. He was using food as engineering. The goal was to produce a resilient, durable combatant who could bleed from a wound and still fight on, whose body could absorb punishment and heal quickly. This understanding turns the gladiator's physique on its head. They were not sculpted Adonaises. They were built like bulldogs, with powerful necks, thick limbs, and a protective bulk that served as their first line of defense. But if this was the ideal form for the arena, how did it translate into the actual techniques and tactics of their combat? What did fighting look like for a man engineered to endure, rather than to chase? This deliberate cultivation of a bulky, resilient body directly dictated how they fought. Forget the image of a nimble swordsman dancing around his opponent. The most common gladiators, like the Murmillo with his heavy helmet and large rectangular shield, or the secutor who chased the net fighter, were built like mobile fortresses. Their armor was substantial, a bronze helmet that could weigh 10 pounds, metal greaves on their legs, and a thick arm guard. Add to this a large, heavy shield and a short sword, and you have a fighter carrying significant weight. Speed and agility were secondary, even impossible. Their success hinged on endurance and the ability to withstand punishment, A fight was a grueling contest of strength and stamina, often lasting much longer than the quick, cinematic duels we see in films. The goal was to outlast your opponent, to weather his attacks until he was exhausted, then move in for a controlled finish. This is where their specialized diet became their tactical advantage. That high carbohydrate gruel provided the slow-burning fuel for a long, grinding engagement. More crucially, the diet promoted the development of subcutaneous fat and incredibly strong bones. This was their biological armor. A layer of fat beneath the skin, the crassus, acted as natural padding. A slashing cut from a blade might bleed dramatically for the crowd, but it was less likely to sever a vital muscle or tendon deep beneath that protective layer. Their calcium-fortified bones, meanwhile, could resist the cracking impact of a heavy shield bash or a falling blow. Their fighting style was a direct reflection of their kitchen. They were engineered to be unstoppable, to walk through attacks that would disable a leaner warrior. Every meal of barley and beans was literally building a more durable fighter, one whose body was his first and most important piece of equipment. This creates a fascinating paradox, however. These men were celebrities, adored by the Roman public. How did this functional, bulky physique align with the ancient world's ideals of beauty and heroism? The secret to their resilience was literally baked into their bones. Let's break down that science from Ephesus in simple terms. Your body is constantly rebuilding its skeleton, using minerals from the food you eat as the raw materials. When a gladiator ate his daily bowl of bean and barley gruel, he was consuming two key minerals, calcium and strontium. Strontium is a mineral very similar to calcium, and it's found in high concentrations in plants, especially in the ash from burned wood or dried beans. Now, when the body goes to repair and strengthen bone, it isn't picky. It will use whatever minerals are available. So if you're drinking that ashy tonic, your system soaks up that strontium alongside calcium from your beans and greens, and it packs both minerals directly into the bone matrix. Think of bone like reinforced concrete. The collagen protein is the flexible steel rebar, giving it tensile strength. The minerals, primarily calcium, are the hard concrete that gives it crushing strength. What the gladiators were doing was adding something extra to their concrete mix, a super mineral fortifier. By flooding their systems with strontium and calcium, they were creating a denser, harder bone structure. This wasn't about making their bones bigger. It was about making them tougher, more resistant to the microfractures and major breaks that were a constant risk in the arena. A shield slammed against an arm, a fall onto the hard sand, a direct blow from a wooden training post. All of these could mean a career-ending injury. But with this mineral-fortified skeleton, their bones could withstand impacts that would shatter an ordinary man's. It was a daily, dietary form of armor plating, built from the inside out. This scientific reality transforms the gladiator from a simple brute into a marvel of ancient biohacking, where the kitchen was as vital as the training ground. But such a specialized, extreme physique must have come with its own set of rules, its own strict code of daily life beyond just what they ate. This stark difference in physique and purpose becomes even clearer when we compare the gladiator to his contemporary, the Roman legionary. Both were professional fighters in the empire's service, yet their diets were worlds apart, shaped by completely different lives. The legionary was a man of motion. His life was the march, covering 20 Roman miles a day in full kit, building fortifications and campaigning across deserts, forests, and mountains. His diet had to be portable, durable, and instantly energizing. His staple was not barley porridge, but hardtack, a dense wheat biscuit that could survive for weeks in a pack. He carried salted pork or bacon, hard cheese, and sour wine. This was a diet of concentrated fats and proteins, designed to fuel intense bursts of exertion and sustain a body constantly on the move, burning calories against the cold and the distance. The soldier needed to be lean, tough, and agile, an endurance machine for the empire's frontiers. The gladiator, however, was a man of place. His world was the ludus, the training school, a static compound where he lived, trained, and ate. He was not marching anywhere. This fixed location was a logistical blessing for his kitchen masters. It allowed for the consumption of food that a soldier could never manage, bulky, wet, and requiring large, stationary pots. That massive cauldron of barley and bean gruel, the pulse, was only possible because the gladiator came to the meal. The soldier had to carry his meal with him. This fundamental contrast in lifestyle dictated the menu. The legionaries' food was about individual survival and mobility, while the gladiators' food was about bulk nourishment and collective management. One diet built a traveler, the other built a resident athlete. Both were highly effective, but for utterly different missions. The soldier's bacon and bread built a body that could conquer territory. The gladiator's porridge and ash built a body that could conquer another man in a 50-foot circle of sand. This comparison shatters the idea of a single ancient ideal of strength. It reveals a sophisticated, almost modern understanding of specialized nutrition, where the fuel was meticulously matched to the function. And if their daily sustenance was so carefully controlled, what about the other rules that governed their lives within the school's walls? What did a typical day look like for a man being engineered for the arena? This dismissive nickname, the Barley Men, echoes through the writings of the empire's greatest minds. The famed physician Galen, who actually treated gladiators early in his career, used the term hordearii with a tone of clinical observation. To the Roman elite, a diet of grains and pulses was the food of peasants, slaves, and laborers. It was fuel for the masses, not a cuisine for the sophisticated palate. So when they looked at the gladiator, this public idol, and labeled him by his most basic sustenance, it created a powerful social contradiction. He was both adored and diminished, a celebrated performer whose very identity was rooted in something considered common. The nickname wasn't just about food. It was a subtle way of placing him in the social order. He might win fame and fortune in the arena, but he could never truly escape the scent of the gruel pot. His strength was born from the diet of the lower classes, a constant reminder of his origins, whether he was a captured soldier, a condemned criminal, or a slave. This intertwining of diet and identity was absolute. You were what you ate, and a gladiator ate what he was given. A menu that defined him as property, as a tool of the spectacle. Yet within that constraint, a fascinating pride could emerge. For the fighter himself, that same bowl of pulse might transform from a mark of servitude into a badge of profession. Just as a blacksmith's hands are stained by soot, or a sailor's skin is weathered by salt, the gladiator's plant-built physique became the living proof of his trade. His thick neck, his dense bones, the protective layer of fat, these were not accidents. They were the direct products of the hordearii regimen. In the closed world of the ludus, this diet was the shared experience, the common fuel that united all trainees regardless of their background. It was what made them different from the lean soldier, the soft merchant, or the pampered aristocrat. Their bodies became walking advertisements for the effectiveness of this system, a testament to the science of their owners. So the nickname cuts two ways. From the outside, it was a label of condescension. From the inside, it could be a source of grim solidarity, the unspoken recipe that forged them into a distinct brotherhood of survival. This deep connection between food and function forces us to re-examine our most basic assumptions about strength. We live in a world obsessed with protein, convinced that muscle and power can only come from meat. What can the gladiator's plate teach us about our own modern myths of nutrition? The gladiator's diet was more than just cheap fuel. It was frontline medicine. And the man who best understood this was not a lanista, but a young physician named Galen of Pergamon. Before he became the most famous doctor in the Roman Empire, before his theories dominated medicine for over 1,000 years, Galen spent his formative years as the surgeon for a gladiatorial school in his hometown. This was his brutal, invaluable residency. In the ludus, he saw wounds no civilian doctor would ever encounter, and he developed treatments with a single, pragmatic goal: get the fighter back in the arena as fast as possible. This environment fostered a level of medical knowledge that was startlingly advanced for its time. The gladiator doctor became an expert in trauma surgery, setting bones, suturing deep gashes, and even performing rudimentary plastic surgery to minimize disfiguring scars. He mastered the use of antiseptics, using vinegar to clean wounds, a practice that actually worked by killing certain bacteria. But his toolkit extended far beyond the scalpel and the needle. The kitchen was his pharmacy. That daily bowl of poles was not just preventative, it was therapeutic. Galen and his successors understood that food was the foundation of healing. The high-calorie barley gruel provided the energy a wounded body desperately needed to repair itself. The beans and lentils delivered plant-based protein, the building blocks for new tissue. And that ashy tonic, the pulvis, was a direct mineral infusion to speed the knitting of shattered bones. But they went further. Historical accounts suggest they incorporated specific herbs into the diet for their medicinal properties. For instance, they might use willow bark, which contains a natural compound similar to aspirin, as a pain reliever and anti-inflammatory. Mint or other aromatic herbs could be used to soothe digestion in men under immense physical stress. Every ingredient was scrutinized for its effect on the humoral balance, to cool inflammation or reduce fever. This was a holistic system where diet, surgery, and herbal medicine worked in concert. The goal was to create a fighter who was not only strong but also resilient. A man whose body could recover from incredible damage with remarkable speed. In this light, the gladiator becomes a testament to an entire ecosystem of ancient science, where the chef and the doctor were collaborators in engineering the ultimate survivor. So we see a complete picture, from the financial logic of the lanista to the medical wisdom of Galen, all converging on a simple pot of porridge. But this leaves us with one final, haunting question. For all this careful cultivation, for all the investment in their diet and their health, what was the ultimate price of this engineered existence? What did this life of calculated survival do to the man who lived it? Their survival depended not just on the fight, but on what happened after the sand settled. When a gladiator limped back through the gates of the ludus, bruised and bloodied, his real battle began, the battle for recovery. Here, the strategic genius of his plant-based diet truly proved itself. That same thick barley and bean gruel, his daily fuel, now became his most powerful medicine. The complex carbohydrates in these foods are broken down slowly by the body, providing a steady, sustained release of glucose into the bloodstream. This was crucial for replenishing the muscle glycogen, stores utterly depleted during the explosive, high-intensity combat of the arena. Unlike a quick sugar rush that would spike and crash, this slow drip of energy ensured his muscles had the raw materials to begin repairing themselves hour by hour, long after the meal was finished. It was a physiological trickle charge, rebuilding his strength from the inside out while he rested. but the diet's benefits went far beyond simple energy. Many of the plants they consumed held hidden healing powers. Lentils and beans are rich in antioxidants and compounds that modern science recognizes for their natural anti-inflammatory properties. Inflammation is the body's emergency response to injury, a necessary process that brings swelling and pain to protect damaged tissue. Yet uncontrolled inflammation can slow healing and cause debilitating soreness. The gladiator's daily intake of these pulses would have acted as a gentle, natural regulator, helping to calm that internal fire and accelerate the repair process. Imagine the deep ache in his muscles from 100 shield strikes, or the throbbing heat around a fresh sword cut. His food was actively working to soothe that pain, to reduce the swelling, and to clear the path for new tissue to grow. Even common herbs like mint or fennel, which might have been added to their gruel or tonic, offered digestive ease and additional anti-inflammatory effects, ensuring their stressed bodies could absorb every possible nutrient. This creates a complete picture of ancient athletic optimization. Their diet was a continuous cycle of preparation and repair. In training, it built dense, durable bodies and loaded their energy reserves. Before a fight, it provided a sharp, quick burst. And after the violence, it switched roles entirely, becoming a recovery system designed to reduce downtime. For the lanista, this meant his valuable asset could return to profitable training faster. For the gladiator, it meant the difference between weeks of agony and a return to relative normalcy. Every spoonful of that simple porridge was a calculated investment in his future, in his very next breath. It was a quiet, daily rebellion against the damage his profession inflicted. So we see the full arc, from the financial logic to the medical science, all converging on a single, profound truth. Their strength was grown, not just fed. This forces a final, uncomfortable reflection, one that looks beyond the kitchen and the training yard to the ultimate reality of their existence. This obsession with meat as the ultimate source of strength is a very modern myth. To the ancient Romans, the connection between red meat and power was not a compliment. It was a cultural insult. Meat, particularly the consumption of bloody, roasted game, was the hallmark of the barbarian tribes on the empire's frontiers. Roman writers like Tacitus described the Germanic warriors feasting on wild boar and drinking heavily, portraying it as a sign of their crude, undisciplined, and impulsive nature. Their strength was seen as brutish and temporary, a product of wildness, not of cultivated skill. The Roman ideal, especially for a disciplined fighter like a gladiator, was the opposite. Their strength was to be engineered, controlled, and sustainable, born from the order of the training yard and the calculated science of the kitchen. Choosing a plant-based diet was, in a symbolic sense, a rejection of that barbaric identity. It was a declaration that their power was Roman, civilized, and systematic, not a wild frenzy bought from a butcher. But beyond culture, there was an even more compelling reason: pure, hard practicality. Meat is a logistical nightmare. In a world without refrigeration, fresh meat spoils within days. Feeding a school of 50 or 100 massive men would require a constant, staggering supply of fresh animals. A chaotic cycle of slaughter, transport, and preparation. The cost would be astronomical, and the risk of spoilage and foodborne illness would be a constant threat to the entire operation. One bad shipment could wipe out a Lannister's investment in a single, feverish week. Grains and legumes, however, were the bedrock of empire for a reason. Barley, wheat, lentils, and beans could be stored for months, even years, in dry granaries. They were cheap, bought in bulk from across the Mediterranean, and utterly reliable. A single sack of barley could feed many men for many days, This was not a diet of lack, but one of brilliant, efficient logistics. The lanista was running a factory for fighters, and he needed a stable, predictable supply chain. The barley men were fed by the same system that fed Rome itself, a global network of agriculture that prized stability above all else. So when we assume these men needed meat to be strong, we are projecting our own cultural values onto a world that saw things completely differently. Their plant-based strength was not a compromise. It was the pinnacle of their civilization's culinary and economic logic. But the gladiator's bowl of barley connects to a system far larger than his training school. To understand the true scale of his diet, you must see the empire from above. The Roman Empire was, in many ways, a machine designed to move grain. At the heart of this machine was the annona, the state-sponsored grain dole that fed the massive, restless population of the city of Rome itself. Hundreds of thousands of citizens were entitled to a monthly ration of free wheat, a political tool to keep the peace, and a logistical undertaking of staggering complexity. This grain did not grow in Italy. It came from the empire's breadbaskets, the fertile fields of Egypt and North Africa. Enormous cargo ships, some capable of carrying over 1,000 tons, made the treacherous journey across the Mediterranean, their holds packed with the harvest that kept an empire from rioting. This created a colossal, state-managed pipeline of cheap, abundant grain. Gladiatorial schools existed within this economic ecosystem. Many were directly owned by the state, and even private schools were run by the ultra-wealthy elite, men who had the political connections and the capital to operate on an imperial scale. For them, accessing the annona supply chain was not a challenge. It was a perk of their status. They could purchase barley and wheat in bulk, at wholesale prices, diverting a tiny fraction of the river of grain that flowed toward the capital. This is why barley was not just a logical choice. It was the only choice that made economic sense on such a scale. Feeding 50 powerful men 5,000 calories a day on meat would have been a ruinous, chaotic enterprise. Feeding them on grain purchased from the same centralized system that fed 1 million people was simply good business. The gladiators' gruel was a direct byproduct of Roman engineering and imperial ambition, a trickle from a river of grain that stretched from the Nile to the Tiber. His strength was literally funded by the harvest of conquered provinces. This grand system ensured his plate was always full, but it also bound his fate to the stability of the empire itself. If the grain ships ever stopped, the city would starve, and the games would go dark. Their gruel connected them to the gods as much as to the grain supply. While their daily diet was driven by economics and medicine, the moments before stepping onto the sand existed in a different realm, one of ritual and divine favor. Gladiators, like all Romans, lived in a world thick with gods, and their violent profession made them especially mindful of the need for protection, both physical and spiritual. Before a major manus or game, the entire event was framed as a sacred offering, often dedicated to the gods of the underworld or to Mars, the god of war. As part of this sacred spectacle, the fighters themselves participated in rituals that could involve specific dietary codes. It was common for participants in important Roman religious ceremonies to undergo a period of purification, or castimonia. This often required abstaining from certain foods, and meat was frequently on that list. The logic was clear: meat was a product of death and bloodshed, a potential source of spiritual pollution. To stand before the gods and ask for their favor, or to honor the memory of the deceased in a funeral game, one needed to be ritually clean. So while a gladiator was no ethical vegetarian, he might very well have been ordered to avoid meat for a day or more before a fight, not for his body, but for his soul. This temporary abstinence transformed his usual plant-based diet into a form of spiritual preparation. The barley porridge became a fasting meal, a deliberate act of purity that aligned his physical being with the solemnity of the ritual. He was emptying himself of impurity to become a vessel for fate. We can picture the scene on the morning of the games, the gladiators in their quarters eating their simple, meatless gruel in silence, not just as fuel, but as an act of devotion. This ritual connection might have extended to the very weapons they used. Some accounts suggest gladiators would visit a temple or shrine before combat, perhaps making a small offering of grain or incense. In that moment, the same barley that fortified his bones became a currency for divine mercy. His diet, therefore, operated on two parallel tracks: the constant, practical science of the training school, and the intense, temporary spirituality of the arena day. One built a body that could survive, the other sought a blessing that might allow him to win. This fusion of the mundane and the sacred reveals a profound truth. For the gladiator, every aspect of his existence, down to the food in his stomach, was part of his preparation for a dance with death. That daily bowl of bland porridge served a purpose far beyond nutrition. Within the high walls of the ludus, the gladiator's diet was a powerful psychological tool, a relentless exercise in control. Every meal was identical, served at the same time in the same portion, to every man regardless of his size or status. This monotony was not an oversight, it was the point. It systematically stripped away personal preference and individuality. A gladiator could not choose his food any more than he could choose his opponent. His sustenance, the very thing that fueled his life and strength, was dictated entirely by the school's regime. This constant, unvaried routine hammered home a single, brutal lesson. You are not a person with desires. You are a piece of equipment that must be maintained according to a strict manual. The discipline of the training yard began in the dining hall. By accepting the same gruel day after day, the fighter was conditioned to accept all other aspects of his controlled existence: the rigid training schedules, the harsh punishments, the absolute authority of the lanista and his trainers. His will was being broken down and rebuilt, not through cruelty alone, but through the numbing predictability of his own dinner. This culinary control forged a specific mindset, one of resigned focus and obedience, essential for a man whose next public performance could be his last. Now hold that image of the silent, utilitarian meal in the barracks. Then shift your gaze to the stands above the arena on the day of the games. The social contrast could not be more violent. As the gladiators prepared with their simple, meatless gruel, the elite spectators who would judge their lives were indulging in lavish, multi-course banquets. The Roman aristocracy feasted on dormice glazed in honey, roasted peacock served in its own feathers, oysters shipped from distant coasts, and of course, abundant roasted meats. Their dining was a spectacle of excess, a display of wealth, choice, and personal taste. They consumed variety, luxury, and symbolism, while the men in the sand below consumed function. This divide was the entire story of the arena in microcosm. The elite, through their wealth and status, had the ultimate privilege. Choice, the gladiator, through his diet and his chains, had none. His body, built by barley, was itself a consumable product for their entertainment. The porridge that made him strong also marked him as property, a living commodity distinct from the free citizens who watched him. This psychological layer completes the picture. The gladiator's vegetarian diet was not just about building bone or saving money. It was about building a specific kind of mind, one shaped by discipline, and starkly aware of its place in the Roman world. The rigid discipline of the gladiator's kitchen was not an absolute prison. Like any system, it had its cracks and its exceptions. While the overwhelming evidence points to a plant-based diet as the standard operating procedure, we must be careful not to replace one myth with another. Not every man who fought in the arena was a slave condemned to a life of gruel. A significant number were volunteers, free men who signed a contract, the octoramentum, binding themselves to a lanista for a set period. These men, often former soldiers seeking fortune or thrill seekers from the lower classes, entered the profession with a different status. They could earn substantial prize money, and with that came a degree of autonomy. It is plausible that a successful volunteer, a crowd favorite who had won several bouts, might have used his earnings to supplement his diet. He could purchase meat, cheese, or fruit from the market, consuming it in private as a personal luxury his enslaved comrades could not afford. This would have been a rare privilege, a tangible reward for victory that set him apart within the school. Furthermore, gladiators were not monolithic. They came from every corner of the empire, from the forests of Germania to the deserts of Syria. A man captured from a nomadic, meat-eating culture might have found the switch to a barley-based diet especially jarring. While the school's regime would have forced the change for practicality, we can imagine a lanista making a rare concession, allowing a prized fighter a taste of familiar food as a psychological boost or a special incentive. The system was pragmatic, not blindly dogmatic. On the highest, most symbolic level, there were moments when meat returned to the menu. After a spectacular victory, or at the grand feast, the Cena Libera, held the night before a major public games, the rules could relax. Ancient sources describe lavish pre-game banquets for the gladiators, open to the public to view. At such an event, meant to showcase the fighters and stir excitement, it is entirely possible that roasted meats and other delicacies were presented. This served a dual purpose. It was a final, generous meal that could be framed as a potential Last Supper. And it was a powerful piece of theatre for the crowd, demonstrating the Lannister's wealth and his care for his stars. Yet even this was likely a performance, a temporary departure from the normal regimen, not a reflection of their daily reality. The key is to see the barley diet as the engine, the constant hum of the machine. Meat was the occasional fuel additive, a reward, a ritual, or a rare concession, but never the primary source of their formidable, engineered strength. To believe otherwise is to mistake the celebration for the workday. This calculated science of bulk did not vanish with the last gladiator. The principle of using dense, starchy foods to forge a resilient, massive physique echoed through history wherever combat favored endurance over agility. Consider the medieval knight in his castle, training for the crush of a tournament, melee, or a protracted siege. While nobility enjoyed meat, the core of a man-at-arms diet was often coarse bread, pottage made from peas and grains, and ale. This was not glamorous fare, but it provided the sustained energy and caloric bulk needed to move and fight in 60 pounds of plate armor, a direct descendant of the gladiator's functional philosophy. Centuries later and a world away, the Japanese sumo wrestler provides a stunning modern parallel. To achieve and maintain their immense, powerful bodies, sumo athletes follow a highly regimented lifestyle built around a single massive daily meal, the chanko nabe. This is a protein-rich stew, yes, but its foundation is a colossal volume of rice, noodles, vegetables, and broth. The goal is identical to that of the Roman lanista, to deliberately cultivate a heavy, shock-absorbent body capable of dominating a small, defined space. The sumo wrestler's mass is his weapon, and it is grown methodically from carbohydrates. Even in modern strength sports, the concept persists. Competitive strongmen, who must pull trucks and lift Atlas stones, routinely consume staggering amounts of food, often prioritizing huge volumes of rice, potatoes, and oats to meet their monstrous caloric demands for both size and power output. The common thread is a clear, timeless nutritional strategy. When the goal is to build a durable, powerful physique for a specific, intense purpose, sheer caloric abundance from starchy staples becomes the most effective tool. It is a lesson in engineering the human form, written first in the barley fields that fed the arena. That final feast before the games is exactly where Hollywood gets it so wrong. In the film Gladiator, we see the fighters in their dimly lit barracks, tearing into roasted meats with their hands, a scene meant to show their raw, animalistic power. It is a powerful visual, one that perfectly aligns with our 21st century belief system. We have been taught, through a century of advertising and fitness culture, that muscle is built from protein, and protein comes from meat. So when a filmmaker wants to instantly communicate strength and primal energy, they reach for that universal shorthand, a hunk of animal flesh. It makes perfect dramatic sense, but it is historical fiction. The persistence of this image reveals more about us than it does about them. Our modern world is obsessed with optimization, with the idea that there is one perfect, scientific path to physical excellence. We see meat as that path, the essential fuel for peak performance. Applying that lens backward, we assume the greatest fighters in history must have operated on the same principle. It feels instinctively right, which is why the myth is so hard to dislodge. But the gladiator's reality forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our assumptions about nutrition are not timeless laws. They are cultural beliefs shaped by our own time and technology. The Romans had a completely different framework, one where strength was engineered from cheap grain and medicinal ash, not from expensive steaks. Their logic was not about maximum muscle definition for appearance. It was about maximum durability for survival. Hollywood replaces this complex, calculated system with a simpler, more emotionally satisfying symbol. A man eating meat is a free agent, a predator. A man eating porridge is a cog in a machine. One fits our ideal of the heroic individual. The other reveals the grim, systemic reality of a life lived as property. So the next time you watch a historical epic, look past the spectacle on the screen and ask a simple question about the world behind it. What is on their plates? That detail, more than any battle scene, can tell you who these people really were and what their society truly valued. So what would it actually feel like to eat that way? Could a modern person survive, let alone train, on the gladiator's gruel? This isn't just a thought experiment. In recent years, a handful of historians, chefs, and even athletes have attempted to do exactly that, to follow the barley and bean regimen for a week or more, becoming test subjects in a very personal form of archaeology. Their experiences peel back 2,000 years and deliver a visceral, often surprising, report from the kitchen of the ludus. The first shock is the sheer monotony. Imagine starting every day with a thick, beige porridge of boiled barley and lentils. For lunch, a variation, perhaps with some beans added. For dinner, the same bowl, maybe with a dried fig for sweetness. There are no spices to speak of, no garlic or pepper, just the earthy, mushy taste of cooked grains, meal after meal after meal. It is sustenance stripped of pleasure, a direct lesson in the psychological control we discussed. Yet, participants consistently report a second, more profound effect, a strange and steady energy. Unlike the spikes and crashes that come from a modern diet of processed sugars and caffeine, the gladiator's fuel provides a slow, constant hum. You feel full for hours, a deep, solid satiety that powers you through physical labor without hunger pangs. This is the endurance engine in action, the complex carbohydrates releasing their energy at a crawl, just as they did for the man training with a wooden sword in the hot sun. But this engine has a notable side effect, one the Romans were certainly familiar with. A diet so overwhelmingly high in fibrous legumes and grains has a dramatic impact on digestion. Modern testers describe a significant increase in, well, volume. The Roman sewer system and the gladiator's own gut were built to handle this reality. It was the inevitable byproduct of a diet designed for bulk efficiency, not for comfort or convenience. Some modern recreations have gone further, attempting to brew the infamous ash tonic, the pulvis. The result is described as a gritty, chalky, profoundly unpleasant drink, like swallowing liquid plaster. Yet, those who stick with the full regimen often speak of feeling a unique sense of density and solidity in their bodies. A tangible weight that isn't fat, but something more rooted. It's a faint echo of that cultivated crasis, the functional armor. Of course, no modern person is subjecting themselves to the same brutal training or mortal stakes, so the full effect can never be truly replicated. But these experiments do one vital thing: they translate ancient text and bone chemistry into a human experience. They remind us that history is not just about ideas and events, but about the weight of a meal in your stomach, the taste of your daily bread, and the very real, physical feeling of being engineered by your own food. This tangible link makes the gladiator's world immediate, and it forces a final, humbling question onto our own plates. The public's perception of these fighters was forever colored by what was in their bowl. To the average Roman citizen packing the stands, the gladiator existed in a strange, contradictory space. He was both a lowly slave, a barley man, and a magnificent, almost divine spectacle of courage. This knowledge of his humble diet did not make him seem brutish. In fact, it likely amplified his aura of disciplined, almost monastic, dedication. The crowd knew these men were not wild barbarians fueled by bloody feasts. They were products of a severe, systematic regimen. Their strength was not accidental or feral. It was earned through years of grueling repetition, both in the training yard and at the dinner table. This cultivated a respect that was different from the fear inspired by a wild beast. The gladiator's power was understood as a form of expertise, a mastered craft built on denial and control, much like an ascetic athlete or a devoted priest of Mars. The irony, however, was thick enough to taste. As the plebeian crowds roared for their favorite fighter, they were cheering for a man whose body was built from the exact same economic foundation as their own. While the rich dined on exotic delicacies, both the gladiator and the poor citizen subsisted on the empire's grain dole, on barley and wheat. The gladiator was just the most extreme, most highly tuned version of that common reality. His spectacular physique was proof of what could be achieved with that simple fuel when combined with relentless, focused purpose. In a way, he was a perverse source of pride for the lower classes, a living testament to the latent power within their own humble sustenance. Yet, this connection also reinforced the social order. The games themselves were a gift from the elite to the masses, a distraction of bread and circuses. The gladiator, for all his glory, remained a piece of property. His impressive body, a demonstration of what the ruling class could accomplish with the most basic human material. He was a symbol of both potential and limitation. A hero crafted from peasant food to die for the amusement of those who would never eat from his bowl. This layered irony was the true genius of the spectacle. It allowed every social class to project their own meaning onto the man in the sand, while the system that fed him remained unchallenged. The sheer scale of the gladiatorial system demanded a kind of ancient sustainability. To feed hundreds of massive men in a single urban school, the lanista had to think like an empire. He was running a factory inside a crowded city, and every resource mattered. Choosing a plant-based diet was a logistical masterstroke that solved multiple problems at once. Consider the land. To produce enough meat to fuel 50 gladiators on a modern high-protein diet would require vast tracts of pasture for grazing livestock. But to grow enough barley and beans to feed those same men required significantly less acreage. Plants deliver calories and nutrients directly, while animals act as a middleman, consuming far more plant matter than they return in edible meat. In an empire where arable land was wealth, the plant-based model was simply more efficient, allowing the lanista to feed his fighters using a fraction of the territory. Then there was water, the lifeblood of any ancient city. Livestock are notoriously thirsty. Raising cattle, pigs, and sheep for regular slaughter would have consumed monumental amounts of water, a precious and sometimes scarce commodity in Rome, which relied on aqueducts. Cultivating grains and legumes, while still water-intensive, was a far more concentrated and manageable use of that hydraulic lifeline. The school's kitchen could operate on a predictable water ration, not a flood. Waste management was another urban headache. A butchering operation on the scale needed for a gladiator school would have generated rivers of blood, piles of offal, and rotting hides, a sanitation nightmare that would attract vermin and disease. The waste from a grain and bean-based kitchen, by contrast, was mostly dry husks and ash, materials that were easier to contain, compost, or even reuse. That ashy tonic they drank was literally made from burned plant waste, closing a small loop in their own consumption. But perhaps the most brilliant advantage was storage. In a world without refrigeration, meat was a ticking clock. It had to be slaughtered, prepared, and consumed within days, creating a relentless, chaotic cycle of supply. Grain and legumes, however, could be bought in bulk during the harvest, poured into dry, vermin-proof granaries, and sit safely for months or even years. This gave the lanista an incredible buffer against famine, price fluctuations, or disruptions in supply. His operation was not hostage to the daily meat market. It was anchored by the stable, silent mountains of grain in his storehouses. This was resilience engineering. By building his fighters on plants, the lanista insulated his business from the very instability that plagued ancient cities. His choice was not merely cheap. It was clean, compact, and catastrophically reliable. It turned the crowded, challenging environment of Rome from a constraint into an advantage. So while we might see their diet as a limitation, through the eyes of a Roman entrepreneur, it was the ultimate urban adaptation, a way to build colossal strength within the strict physical and practical limits of the ancient city. The games grew more spectacular, but the kitchen likely did not. Even as the Roman Empire expanded, absorbing new provinces and their cuisines, the core logic of the gladiators' diet remained stubbornly fixed. Imagine the vast markets of late imperial Rome, overflowing with spices from India, dates from North Africa, and exotic fruits shipped from the farthest corners of the known world. The elite menus grew ever more elaborate, a symbol of the empire's reach. Yet down in the barracks, the fundamental recipe for a fighter probably saw little innovation. The barley and bean formula was too effective, too cheap, and too deeply ingrained in the system's economics to be abandoned for fashion. Why would a lanista, watching his costs rise with every new extravaganza in the arena, suddenly start feeding his men expensive imported foods? The proven science of building durable, resilient bodies from bulk grains was a solved problem. It worked. Changing it would have been an unnecessary risk and a certain expense. However, this doesn't mean their plates were entirely frozen in time. With the empire's growth came new sources of manpower. Gladiators were recruited from conquered territories, from Germanic tribes to the Middle East. These men grew up on different staples, millet, sorghum, or different varieties of wheat. A pragmatic lanista might have substituted one cheap grain for another based on local supply and price, but the nutritional profile would have stayed remarkably similar. The goal was always the same: calories, carbohydrates, and bulk protein from plants. The ashy tonic, the pulvis, might have seen minor regional variations, using charred local woods or bones, but its purpose as a mineral supplement was constant. Where we might see slight evolution is at the very top of the profession. For the superstar gladiator, the idol who won his freedom and continued to fight as a wealthy freelancer, all bets were off. Such a man, a celebrity in his own right, could afford to eat anything he wanted. He might indulge in the luxurious diets of the elite, including meat, as a public display of his success and changed status. But for the vast majority of fighters, the anonymous ranks who filled the games, the daily reality was one of timeless consistency. The empire's cuisine diversified around them, while their own fuel remained a monument to pragmatic, unchanging efficiency. This reveals a profound truth about the gladiatorial institution. For all its violence and spectacle, it was fundamentally conservative. Its practices were refined over centuries into a brutally efficient machine. And the diet was the most reliable cog in that machine. To change the food was to tamper with the engine itself. So when the Christian Emperor Theodosius finally banned the games in the late 4th century, the last generation of gladiators likely ate the same gruel as the first. Their strength was always grown from the same humble, unchanging earth. Their vegetarian diet was never one single reason, but a web of interlocking logic. It was a professional calculation, not a personal creed. The lanista saw barley and beans as the ultimate bulk fuel, the cheapest way to deliver the 5,000 daily calories needed to maintain a human engine of combat. This economic imperative perfectly aligned with a deliberate nutritional strategy, one designed not for a lean warrior but for a shock absorber. The diet cultivated a protective layer of fat and fortified bones with mineral-rich ash, building a body that could bleed from a slash and still fight on. In the infirmary, that same gruel became medicine, its slow-burning carbohydrates and plant-based proteins speeding recovery, while its anti-inflammatory properties soothed battered muscles. Logistically, grains were a manager's dream, stable for storage and simple to supply, turning the crowded city from a constraint into an advantage. And culturally, this plant-based strength set the gladiator apart from the meat-eating barbarian, framing his power as Roman, civilized, and systematically engineered. Every spoonful of that simple porridge served multiple masters: the accountant, the doctor, the trainer, and the empire itself. This was the real genius behind the myth, a holistic system where every bowl built a more durable, profitable, and survivable fighter. The fierce gladiator, then, was truly a creature of the field, not the butcher's block. His legendary power was grown from barley and beans, a truth now carved into the very chemistry of his bones and the ledgers of his owners. We have seen the science, the high strontium and calcium in their skeletons whispering of plant ash and gruel. We have followed the cold logic of the lanista, for whom a vegetarian diet was a masterstroke of cost control and risk management. And we have understood the brutal fight science, where a body built for endurance and shock absorption, layered with protective fat and dense bone, was the ultimate weapon for survival in the sand. This story dismantles a modern myth, revealing that our assumptions about strength and protein are not eternal truths, but products of our own time. History is full of such surprises, moments where the past refuses to fit neatly into the boxes we build for it. It challenges us to look deeper, to question the stories we think we know. What other historical myths would you like to see unraveled? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into an ancient mystery, please like this video and subscribe for more explorations that turn our understanding of the past upside down.